All right, let's talk about James Clear's incredible book, Atomic Habits. The whole idea is actually super simple, but it's also really profound. It says that real, lasting change, it doesn't come from some huge, dramatic action. Nope. It comes from making these tiny, consistent improvements that over time just compound into something truly remarkable. You know the feeling, right? We've all been there. You set this massive goal. You're going to get fit, write that novel, finally learn Spanish, and you have this big burst of motivation. And then, poof, you're right back where you started. It's so frustrating. But what if the problem isn't you? What if it's not about your willpower at all? What if it's just your approach that's wrong? And that leads us to the first big idea from the book. And honestly, it's a little counterintuitive. When we have a big goal, our first thought is to make a big, drastic change. But Atomic Habits says, no, no, no. The real solution isn't to think bigger, it's to start smaller, like way, way smaller. So there's a name for this philosophy, the aggregation of marginal gains. It just means finding a tiny 1% improvement in everything you do. Because when you add all those little 1% gains up, they create a huge overall jump in performance. It sounds almost too simple, but there's this amazing real-world story from professional sports that shows just how unbelievably powerful this is. Okay, so for about 100 years, the British cycling team was, well, they were kind of a joke. They had only won a single Olympic gold medal since 1908. They had never, ever won the Tour de France. They were so bad that a top bike company literally refused to sell them bikes because they were worried it would make their brand look bad. Ouch. But then, in 2003, this guy Dave Brailsford comes in, and he brings that whole aggregation of marginal gains idea with him. They started with the obvious stuff, right? More comfortable bike seats, rubbing alcohol on the tires for a little extra grip. But they didn't stop there. They went nuts. They tested fabrics in a wind tunnel, hired a surgeon to teach the team how to wash their hands properly to avoid getting sick, and they even found the absolute perfect pillow for each rider to get the best possible sleep. They painted the inside of the team truck white just so they could spot tiny specks of dust that might mess with the bikes. Was it obsessive? Oh, for sure. But was it effective? Absolutely. Get this. In just a 10-year stretch, from 2007 to 2017, all those tiny 1% improvements added up to this: 178 world championships, 66 Olympic or Paralympic gold medals, and 5 Tour de France victories. It became the most dominant run in the history of the sport, all built on these tiny, almost invisible changes. So, how in the world does that happen? Well, the British cycling story is just a perfect example of this really fundamental principle, the incredible power of compounding. This is probably my favorite metaphor from the whole book. You know how money grows with compound interest? Well, your habits work the exact same way. The effects of your habits multiply as you repeat them. On any single day, it doesn't feel like much. But you stretch that out over months and years, and the impact is just massive. Let's just put some math to it for a second. What do you think happens if you get just 1% better at something every single day for a year? The result is pretty mind-blowing. You end up nearly 38 times better than where you started. That is the explosive, exponential power of showing up and making small, consistent gains. Now here's what's so powerful about this visual. That top curve, that's you getting 1% better every day. But look at that bottom curve. That's what happens if you get 1% worse each day. You basically end up at 0. It's such a clear picture of how your tiny daily choices are putting you on one of these two paths, whether you realize it or not. Okay, this brings us to a really, really important idea about how we usually try to make changes. We're all taught to be goal-oriented, right? But Atomic Habits makes the case that focusing on goals is actually a big mistake. I mean, just think about it. Every single athlete at the Olympics wants to win the gold medal. Every person interviewing for a job wants to get that job. The winners and the losers, they have the exact same goal. So obviously, the goal itself can't be what separates them. And there are other problems with only thinking about the goal. You know, achieving a goal is just a temporary fix. Sure, you cleaned your messy room, but if you still have messy habits, it's just going to get messy again. It also ties your happiness to one single outcome. You tell yourself, I'll be happy when I get there. And it can cause this yo-yo effect. Think about marathon runners. So many of them stop training the day after the race because the goal is over. So what's the alternative? Focus on your systems instead. The system is the process that you follow. Goals are good for setting a direction, but it's the systems that actually get you there. You have to fall in love with the process, not just dream about the prize at the end. And this all leads us to the deepest and honestly the most powerful idea in the entire book: building identity-based habits. So you can think of behavior change in 3 layers. On the outside, you've got your outcomes. That's what you get. The next layer in is your processes. That's what you do. But at the very core, the deepest layer is your identity. That's what you believe about yourself. Now, most of us try to change from the outside in. We start with the result we want. But real, lasting change works from the inside out. It starts with your identity. Okay, here's a perfect example. Imagine 2 people are trying to quit smoking. Someone offers them a cigarette. The first person says this: "No thanks, I'm trying to quit." Now that sounds fine, but what identity is that statement really communicating? It's saying, I am a smoker who is trying to resist. Their identity is actually fighting their goal. Now, check this out. The second person says this: "No thanks, I'm not a smoker." It's such a small difference in the words, but it signals a massive shift in identity. This person no longer sees themselves as a smoker. Their new behavior is just a natural extension of who they believe they are, which makes saying no almost effortless. And that's the whole key right there. You have to become the type of person you want to be. The goal isn't to read a book, it's to become a reader. The goal isn't to run a marathon, it's to become a runner. So that's the big question then, isn't it? If real change is all about identity, how do you actually go about changing what you believe about yourself? Well, the book lays out a process that's actually surprisingly straightforward. It's really just a simple 2-step process. First, you decide what kind of person you want to become, and then, and this is the most important part, you prove it to yourself with small wins. Every tiny action you take is like casting a vote for that new identity. Every time you go for a walk, you cast a vote for I'm a healthy person. Every time you write just 1 page, you cast a vote for I'm a writer. These small habits are the evidence that eventually reshapes your self-image. And that leaves us with this final, incredibly powerful quote from the book. You do not rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. Your goals can point you in the right direction, sure, but it's the tiny habits you build into your daily systems that will actually determine where you end up. So the real question to ask yourself isn't just what do I want to achieve, but who do I wish to become?